Good afternoon and welcome to the Doing Business with UNDP and UN through Procurement Opportunities webinar co-hosted by UNDP Seoul Policy Center, KITA, and GPS Association. A few housekeeping announcements. Simultaneous interpretation will be provided at today's webinar. Please use Zoom's interpretation feature and select the language of your choice. Allow me to introduce myself. I will serve as MC for today's webinar. I'm Do-hyun Lee from the International Cooperation Department at KITA. Today, we will have two speaker sessions. There will be a Q&A after each session to address pre-submitted questions as well as selected questions received during the speaker presentations. First, opening remarks from one of the organizers, Ki-hyun Kim, Director of International Cooperation Department at KITA.
Good afternoon. As was just introduced, I'm Ki-hyun Kim, Director of International Cooperation of Korean International Trade Association, KITA. While the world continues to face challenges due to the pandemic, it is indeed a pleasure to be able to hold this seminar online. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to all who have made this webinar possible. Director Ann Yupna of UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and Vicky Kim, Head of Business Division at Korea GPS Association, and our speaker from the UNDP Global Shared Service Center, Baktyo Kamraev, as well as all of our online attendees today. Since the pandemic has begun, the international community, including UNDP and the UN in general, have focused their efforts on public procurement of medical supplies. And this has opened up new opportunities for Korean companies. Especially in Korea's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the world's attention focused on the nation's advanced disease prevention capabilities, which in turn have allowed Korean PPEs and other goods to take part in overseas procurement projects actively. Despite such developments, Korea's entry into the international public procurement market remains at 35th rank globally. So we can say that we need continued efforts and strategic measures to improve the situation. Through today's webinar, I sincerely hope you will gain a better understanding of the UN procurement procedures, as well as governmental assistance that is available for you. Once again, my sincere gratitude goes out to all participants of this webinar, and I look forward to further cooperation with UNDP and GPS. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you, Director Kim. Next, we invite Ann Yupner, Director at UNDP Seoul Policy Center, to speak.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome all our guests today and to co-host today's webinar on doing business with UNDP as part of the wider UN development system through procurements. The UNDP Seoul Policy Center, which represents the United Nations Development Program in Korea, plays a bridging role between the Republic of Korea and countries around the world. The Korean business community has a wealth of innovative technologies, solutions, and services to offer, which can support initiatives that aim to overcome the complex development challenges countries face around the world today. This has become especially evident in today's COVID times. We are happy to witness an increasing level of interest by the Korean private sector to take part in the procurement opportunities of UNDP and the broader UN. At the same time, we have also heard of the various challenges businesses face in the process, such as navigating the UNDP procurement procedures. I hope that today's sharing of examples and know-how on UNDP procurements will help you understand better how we buy goods and services and how you can successfully work with us. After the event, we will share some additional resources to facilitate your work, including 2 step-by-step video guides on the UNDP e-tendering process which my team has translated in Korean language. Before I conclude, let me express my special thanks to our co-organizing partners, the Korea International Trade Association and the Korea GPAS Company Export Association, who have provided invaluable support towards the organization of this event. I look forward to a fruitful discussion and exchange of ideas. And to proceed, let me invite my colleague, Dr. Bakhtiyor Kamraev, team lead for the Procurement Services Unit at the UNDP Global Service Center based in Malaysia. Bakhtiyor has been with UNDP since 2003, delivering advisory and procurement support globally while being based in Uzbekistan, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, and our headquarters in New York. He has extensive practical experience in establishing global, corporate, and local long-term agreements for goods and services, and has prior experiences with both private and public organizations. Without further ado, please welcome my colleague Bakhtiyor. Bakhtiyor, the floor is yours. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, and for the introduction, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and glad to be on this event. And thank you so much to the organizers, UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and associations, KITA and GPAS. I hope that all participants are in a good health and safe on these unusual days. So today, let me allow to go straight to the point of my presentation based on the agenda we developed with UNDP Seoul. Not going too much to details on the SDG, as you know, that UNDP is one of the main player of the development, because the mandate of the UNDP is development in the countries. And while UNDP has specific areas of focus, like reducing the poverty, the good governance, working on the institutions, partnership, there are many projects which are cross-cutting, which touches the other SDG goals. So as you know, SDG goals have been taken by the United Nations and all the country members back in 2015. In today's agenda, given the time given, I would like to very briefly mention about UNDP, because I think the information you can find on websites, and also I will provide a few links in my presentation you can further explore, and some statistics, but also how to access the information for UNDP, the projects. And as one of the requirement was taking some example, focus on UNDP tender. So I picked up one of the examples, which I would like to walk you through. And the annexes is those slides which hopefully would be useful. I will not be going through the annexes. It will be part of the presentation, and we plan to share with you, all of you. All right, so 1 second. We work globally, and we work with many stakeholders, the national governments, the hosts in the host countries, private sector, all kind of institutions, and civil society, NGOs, INGOs, just to name. Our global footprint is indeed global in 177 countries and 5 regional bureaus. So the region where we're based is Asia Pacific. So that's one of the regions. What we buy. One thing I would like to, any questions I will be happy to take, but what I would like to focus on a more example. So here, some information, the quick snapshots I'm taking to explain what kind of the goods and services we do buy. We buy all kind of the goods. If I may mention, we have the categories 3,500 plus, which may expand to the pharmaceuticals, IT and communication equipment, the medical equipment, motor vehicles, ambulances, and all kind of the services, the complex and very diverse. It could be engineering, it could be travel, security, it could be survey nationwide, it could be access to justice related, it could be anything. It's so wide that it's hard to mention a specific one. So every country office, as you could see in 177 countries, they work with the government directly, and they come with the framework, or they have a CPD call, country program documents, where they agree with the government what kind of the projects UNTB will be supporting locally. A few statistics, and more statistics you can find in the annual procurement reports, or the statistics report to call, which is produced by UNOPS. And at the end of the slide, you will have the link. It's a very intuitive and visually very clear report. This is just a snapshot from those reports. So here in this, the snapshot, you could see here that UNDP, let me just use the laser pointer, make it easy. What you could see here that in 2020, UNDP had a procurement volume 2.5 billion, and number of countries from where we purchased, the percentages total to the UN, which is about 23 billion was, and it was a ranking number 3 in terms of the purchasing value among the all 39 agencies. So I think number 1 goes to UNICEF and WHO, which is obviously understandable from the COVID impact from the last year. There was a lot of purchasing also on the UNDP side related to the health. If you look at the categories, we have the management and admin, which covers a lot of sub categories, which I was mentioning. It includes all higher level consultancy services, re-engineering, the project management, human resources, the IT solution, web design, so on and so forth. So it's a lot of the other projects, engineering services, medical, IT, and the other products. And you could see here the procurement by the region from where we procure. So it's good to see that in Asia we have a big chunk of the value of the procurement we have been buying from the Asia, for Asia. So for Africa, for Europe, that's a higher level figures, which gives a bit kind of the information. Overall, you could see that UNDP from 2003 have been buying averaging to about 1.5, close to 2 billion and above 2 billion. So that's the trend. Now here on this slide, I would like to mention about specifically the Korean suppliers. And as you could see here, is not really big. It's only 4 million was for last year. And I think that's the one of the reasons that would like to encourage Korean suppliers to participate in the UNDP tenders more and more frequently, because we have a chunk of opportunities for Korean suppliers. So here 4 million, and in this statistic you could see that we have been buying some medical equipment, the building, construction, machinery, and that's the company names. So we have this statistic is available at public. You can really go and drill down to all kind of the data you like to pull out. Now about the how to market to UNDP. The first thing, I provide the links, and you will have this presentation in your hands. If you go to this website, you could see all the spend data in a very kind of granular in details for each country, for each category. for each location, and so on. What would suggest commonly to register in UNGM, which stand for United Nations General Marketplace. This is the one single window for 28 plus UN agencies, which they post their procurement opportunity. I think that's the way forward. Apart from the UNDP, the suggestions here is to go and check what other opportunities would be with another UN agencies as well. Here the link, and I have a few slides in the annexes, openundp.org. This will take you to all projects we have globally. It's a very nice visually, like a dashboard side of information. You can go to by country, and you can go to drill down to specific projects and up to even the information like a project documents and annexes, attachments. So all the useful information you can find there. Means that if your target is to go to and look at the Philippines, you will find there a lot of projects, documents, and you can read them, understand what other projects are ongoing. Typically, the life of the project goes between 3 to 5 in average, and procurement is one of the main parts. I should mention that approximately between 50 to 70% in most of the projects which UNDP operates goes to procurement, either in a way of the goods and services, or could be construction works. So please check. There are a lot of opportunities for you. Visit the UNDP website. So I'm giving the link where you can go and get more information. After you obtain information, analyze it, you can reach out to the country office and introduce your company, introduce your product, request for virtual product presentation. These days you don't need to travel. So I think the positive side that you can make a presentation through Zoom. And one of them, a few queries came about the policy. So UNDP policy is available to public, and that's a link. You can go and see all the policies, procurement, finance, HR, program, and the whole details you can find because it's part of the transparency. UNDP advertise all the policies which is available at the public. So on this note, I think allow me to go straight to the example case study. So this example, because a few queries came regarding the showing example and how to meet the criteria of UNDP. We, as at the beginning was mentioned that I work for the Global Procurement Hub, which is based in Malaysia. We have another hub, which is based in Copenhagen. And what they do, they set up global contracts as well for health, for renewable energy, for election, crisis response. Apart from those portfolios or the categories, most of them we manage from here, from Malaysia. So one of them, an example, and at the end of the session, I'll show what the pipeline projects we're working on in regards to the global and regional contracts. So this presentation is not for specific country office, but it's more for global. The reason is that because we don't work for specific kind of case for country office, what we do, the spend data analysis consolidates certain categories and identify those categories which can be established global or regional contracts. All right, this the case was referring to, and you could see here we issued in May, and as we speak now, it's evaluation stage. It was for global long-term. It is for global long-term agreements for supply of electric tricycles, solar-empowered tricycles, electrical scooters. So that was the requirement of the solicitation document. It will be consist of the two parts: invitation to bid and a very short information about the criteria and specification and bidding forms. In the first part of the ITB, what you could see here is that there will be a reference to the e-tendering system, because we, for a number of years back, and all country offices moved to the e-tendering system. In the tendering system, you can find all the guidelines here, how to prepare your bids, how to submit, what to do, where to send your query, and so on. Another point and important thing that I would like to mention is UNDP general terms and conditions. I recall that about 10 years ago, we had a big projects with Korean suppliers, and they were not aware about UNDP, so they have been looking at us as a private sector. And we had a long debates on the general terms and conditions. So the GTC for UNDP is quite specific, and because it is standard, and in the moment if supplier would like to change or challenge the legal provision, we have to go back to the New York to legal office and to agree or disagree with certain provisions. So as part of the tendering process, what we do, we ask vendors to accept the general terms and conditions for the goods and services. Now it's in one. It was separate in the past. Now it's in one altogether. Another important aspect is UN supply code and anti-fraud policy, which suppliers need to familiarize themselves with that. It's just a snapshot of how the e-tendering looks. So for this specific case, long-term agreement for 3 cycles, you could see that we had 5 lots for every specific item, and here the documents mentioned. One thing it's I would like to draw attention, because I will be, I think, clarifying one of the questions. One of the questions was regarding to the ESG. This is the questionnaire about the ESG, environment, social, and governance, that we started using in our tendering process. We ask the ESG related questions from company, to what extent they progressed. And here, okay, I think a few examples. So in this ITB, the section 3, if I quickly, allow me to quickly go through it. So in this example of the ITB, we allowed partial submission, but for the lots. Let's say it will be clearly mentioned, it is to be submitted per lot basis. So the partial lot will not be accepted, but bidders can submit for 1 or 2 or 3 lots. The duration of the contract is 3 years. This is the standard the timeline for the long-term agreements or framework agreements, if you wish to call it. We have 3 years, and I think that's the good opportunity for Korean suppliers to look for such the big contracts, in addition to the specific contracts in the country offices related. So here is just the explanation. Each lot, how many contracts will be awarded, up to how many number of the long-term agreements. And here the explanation of it will be the secondary competition among the LTA holders. That will be like informal tendering process. The ITB is very self-explanatory in detail. What I'm showing you is just some fragments from them. But the purpose was that the purpose to establish several contracts for each lot. And because we're working globally and everywhere, we like to supply to other destinations. So the requirement can vary slightly from one location to another location, including some spec requirements. So this is where it comes, the secondary competition among the suppliers. It is the criteria which has been inquired as well in one of the questions. The preliminary examination, what we do in UNDP, that's a standard that company have to submit all the appropriate documentation. It is administrative check, I would say. So at this stage, if there will be minor deviation, normally UNDP can go back and ask some information. But if all the sections empty, of course, UNDP may decide not to go and ask questions. So the bid validity, language, minimum bid document, those things. After preliminary examination, it goes to in more detail, like minimum eligibility, and that's a pass-fail because we're using invitation to bid. Invitation to bid is used for the construction works and goods, while RFP, which is scoring system, used for the services. So here in this criteria, you could see that a number of criteria are standard: the eligibility, the legal status, conflict of interest, and so on. And you have the form which bidder has to fill in and submit. All right, so here, again, it's another slide that we do ask about the minimum years of requirements, the turnover of the company, how much it does, because we'd like to select the one who has the capability. Anything related to the joint venture, if that would be decided. The financial evaluation section would be explaining how the evaluation would be conducted. So actually, it's a straightforward and clear document which link it to the certain documents where a company have to submit as entire bid. In this example, the scope was global. So if you look at here, as I mentioned, you have lot 1, lot 2, 3, 4, 5, which we have different products, because after analyzing the market, we identified that the players could be quite different from each product to product. That's why it was decided to divide by lots. Delivery location is the all regions, 5 regions: Asia, Pacific, Africa, Arab Bloc, Europe, and Arab states. There could be some exceptions, which we did mention here, excluding some countries which we don't expect it will be demanded this product for Europe, let's say China and North Korea, because our data didn't show that there is some demand was for the last few years. This next example of the Section 6 returnable bids by the suppliers. In the next few 2 slides, I will show you the example of Form B and Form F, right? The financial one. So this is the tick box for Korean suppliers to make sure that they submit all the documents required. The mandatory is the company has to pass. So mandatory means they have to submit the proposal with the information requested. So you could see here the profile, some information, including the requirements of the standards for the battery, solar panel, certificates, and any license, if any, required. That's a financial part where we did ask companies to submit their model products, pricing based on the FCA, including the pre-inspection delivered here. So that total cost, and we gave the simulation that it will be delivered to the following countries. And you could see here's the 5 geographical locations. The next slide, the next table, it refers to UNDP, where we will be internally calculating the shipping costs. So what has been requested from company is to submit only FCA. And that's the other part would be done by the UNDP internally. I think I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but here, my last slide, that just to give you a heads up, there are upcoming big, large projects, which is the engineering design consultancy services. We have concluded one of the exercise and would like to repeat it. So the purpose of this engineering design consultancy is to find company who will be doing all kind of the services, topographical, survey and hydrological survey, the project management, construction supervision, feasibility study, and so on. So it's a long list of the services which we're looking for to find regional or global players. It's mainly regional players what we're looking at. We found that global will be a bit difficult. Then the other part is agriculture machineries, which we're going to re-tender. We also did tender. And we're going to re-tender for agriculture machineries. That's also would be global or regional contracts, the tractors and implements. So I'm looking forward to Korean suppliers to really be active and participate in all these coming upcoming pipeline projects, construction equipment, like a dump tipper tracker, excavator, backhoe, crane, drones relates to the technology, which will be also launching the tender, which relates to the mapping, survey, agriculture, submersible. I'm giving just the high level, the indicator, what kind of the products would be tendered. And electric hybrid vehicles. We did tender in the past, but I think market was not mature. That was back in 2017. However, we're really looking forward to whether it be manufacturers or would be the aggregator companies who would be selling hybrid electric vehicles. That the tender also is coming. And another one is the waste management equipment, which we also would be tendered out. So what we do, we conduct the spend data, global spend data, and identify the new categories which are commonly used by 177 countries, and identify the categories which need to be tendered. So the same does my colleagues in Copenhagen, which relate to the health, renewable energy, and the crisis and the health. So I think on that note, I thank you. And just quickly, if I may, so here when I mentioned about Open UNDP slides, you can actually go navigate. It's publicly open for everyone. You can go and navigate to the map. Let's say here, Afghanistan popped up, 400. This is the program in Afghanistan alone. And here in the next slide, I click the Philippines. And in Philippines, you could see that you have the budget 23.4 million. That's 2021, by the way. And you could see go back to a number of years back to see the statistics. If you go and drill down to the information, you can find the project document. You can find all these links downloadable. You can find also purchase orders, which has been placed under this specific project. So, okay, and these notes, thank you, and happy to take questions. Over.
네, 팀장님 발표 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for that
이제
presentation.
사전에 참가분들께서
There were
남겨주신
some
질문과
questions
채팅창을
that
통해
were
실시간으로
given
보내주신
prior to
질문을
the
토대로
webinar, and we do
질의응답
have a
시간을
couple
갖도록
of questions
하겠습니다.
coming up
다만 시간적
online.
제약으로 모든
We will
질문을
have a
다루지는
Q&A
못한다는 점
session,
미리
but
양해
please
부탁드립니다.
understand that we will not be able to deal with all of the questions due to
우선
time
첫 번째
constraints.
질문인데요.
I ask for your kind
조달의
understanding.
경우 현지
First
수요가
question.
선행이 되어야 할 텐데
Procurement notices are
신기술의
often
경우
based on
현지
local
수요를 찾을 수
demands, but in
없어
some
조달
cases
공고
there is less
자체가 안 나는
demand due
경우가
to lack of
많다고
awareness
들었습니다.
at the local level for
이때
new and emerging
업체에서 정보를
technologies.
공유하거나 또 조달에
So
참여할
how
수
can
있는
companies with
방법에는
new and
어떤 것들이
innovative
있을지
technologies share their
궁금하다는
knowledge
질문이
and enter
들어왔습니다.
into the UN procurement market?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, that what I can mention is that being in the country office, in a number of country offices, there could be a large project which could be attractive for the supplier, and it could be linked to the new technologies and innovation. So what I would suggest that I think the company should be more proactive, and if they register in UNGM website, it has the automatic notification, which would be sending to companies what kind of the procurement opportunities could be in the countries, with the name, with the link, and so on. Apart from that, what I would like also suggest, there are a number of collaborative procurement conduct among the UN agencies. I did a few of them, and like a public solution, public cloud solution, or the VCAT, and so on. So look at the opportunity where there is a big bargaining, kind of the big value of the tendering process has been advertised. It could be the collaborative, it could be the global or regional LTAs, like example I just showed in my presentation, but it also could be in the UNDP. So the fact is the UNDP is a not manufacturing entity, and it's difficult to forecast, predict what would be in the next 1 or 2 years kind of the projects. But from my experience that UNDP embarks on different projects, I remember that it could be that taking the 200 million big global fund for HIV and malaria. It could be a couple of $1 million for setting up the payroll system for entire kind of the government. So I would say that there are a lot of the opportunities which the companies need to look at and verify. It's all about information. Information is power, and I suggest go and check the information. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank
다음
you very
준비된
much.
질문은 다음과
The
같습니다.
next question will
UNDP
be,
조달 절차에 NGO도
can
참여할
NGOs
수
also
있는지에
participate in
대한 질문이
UNDP
있습니다.
procurement opportunities?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to quickly, absolutely. So NGOs, and we have been working with NGOs. I would like just to share a quick link, if you allow me. So if you go to the POPP, UNDP org, right? That's the live document. Can you see my screen? So that's the website where you can go and see the information. Here you can find a specific section, innovation, CSO, and NGO engagement. If you click it, and you'll see that you have one of them is the innovation challenge, which describes in detail how to engage, what to do. Another part is engaging the NGO and CSO. The fact is that NGO, from my experience when we have been working, the NGOs are quite specific, and in most cases they should not compete with the private sector, because the funding and the business models operandi is different. So the NGOs who have grassroots experience, they need to look at the different options. You have the grant modality, you have the partnership engagement as a responsible party. You have also, of course, as a competitive process. I just want to show here, you have the collaborative, and you have like a competitive selection. You could see the samples there, call for proposal. They're quite different from the samples we have for the private sector. So there are plenty of opportunity. I would suggest you go and click the information, read it, and I think you'll find a lot of information there for NGO. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Let's move on to the next question. How do you divide the roles of global and regional teams versus local teams for UNDP procurement? What are some examples of global, regional, and local procurement notices? Can you give us some more explanation about those differences?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the way how it works, global and non-global. We have two global hubs. One is based in Copenhagen, and another one is based in Malaysia, where I'm heading. The way how we operate is that we pull out procurement spend data annually, and we analyze in a great detail what kind of the categories could be potential for the global and regional contracts, because setting up the long-term agreements for such a big scale, it requires specific skills and resources. In the country office, you can actually in my slides in the presentation, you can find there is a link to UNDP procurement notice where you can find specific country office and procurement opportunity there. So the difference is that the country office has certain projects. In average, I would say between 30 to 40 projects country they have, which they agreed with the host government, and then they implement locally. So the difference is that those are very specific for catered to the country needs, while the global hubs, like in our case, what we're looking to the categories which could be spent by most of the country officers, which it makes sense to consolidate and make it as a one global or regional contract. Like vehicles, ambulances, engineering, drones, we mentioned, the heavy machinery, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a difference between the regional and the country office. Another example I can tell you that we have been setting up, when I was in health, we have been setting up global contracts for ERV, antiretroviral drugs for HIV and TB malaria treatment. So there was multi-million big large projects which is not expected to set up by the country office, but it's mainly the job of the specialized team which are managing the category in a right way. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll ask another question. This is something that you mentioned during the presentation, and this is respect to the ESG trends. So companies' commitment to sustainability, such as ESG ratings and RE1 membership. Can you talk about the trend? Does it also apply to the UNDP and UN procurement?
No, thank you. That's also interesting question. We do apply. So the policy in UNDP is widely covers ESG matters, and while it covers the ESG matters, we know that there are tools need to be developed. As we speak, let's say my team is working on the guidelines how to apply the ESG to the ambulances, minibuses, and the passenger vehicles. And we're also planning to, not planning, actually working on the guidelines for ESG, working for other products, which is related to the health, related to the renewable energy. The moving forward to the ESG, from our experience, it's an interesting journey, but also is a challenging. So we need to understand the market, how it operates, and when it's ready. And we're looking at the kind of the phase approach. Phase approach starting with the basic, analyzing the information and data, and what company can do. An example that we took mapped all the passenger vehicle suppliers, Hyundai, Toyota, and the Ford, and all of them. We look at what kind of the ESG elements they have implemented, what can be standardized. The next step would be phase 2, how we can work with the companies to implement the phase 2, to have the full ESG the agenda, to implement all the points on the ESG. In the presentation, you noted that I mentioned that for 3 cycles, we start asking the questionnaire regarding the ESG. The purpose of that, we're not making this as an assessment, but it's mainly for assessing the market, understanding how the market operates and what they have done. But for sure, it's this is on our top agenda, and we're working on that. In addition to that, I should mention that my colleague also working with UNEP and other agencies, working on the specific guidelines for the human trafficking and human rights. So that's on top of our agenda, and it will be embedded in the heart of the procurement process. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 다음으로
Thank you very much. Now we have a couple of questions that came online during the webinar. You mentioned about the procurement areas can be divided into goods and services, but the question is about IT systems. Are they also included in the procurement items? For example, the toll collection system in Korea called HiPass system, is that also eligible for procurement?
Okay. No, thank you for the question. You know that UNDP works with the government, as I mentioned, and the projects are so diverse. So we mainly work for the government. All the vehicles, ambulances we're buying, like now as I speak, we're replacing 120 ambulances for one of the Asian country. We're not buying for UNDP, we're buying for government. So the government comes with different projects. One of them could be collecting the tolls on the road. Because we had also different projects on the road infrastructure and mapping and implementing some systems. So I should not exclude, and there could be opportunity also where government reaches out to UNDP and ask, can you help us with the tendering process for this specific project? So the answer is that for sure we just need to look for the opportunity and see where you can really pitch in your product or services.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. We also have another question. We want to understand whether UNDP is responsible for evaluating the supplier, or does the client that UNDP is working with does the evaluation?
예시의 경우
So in the example, for example, the toll collection system, does the final customer, meaning the Ministry of Transportation of Laos, does the evaluation, or does the UNDP does this on behalf of Laos?
So when government requests UNDP to conduct a procurement process, UNDP follows its policy and procedure. UNDP can also engage the government site as a participant or as an observer. But typically, the UNDP engage only subject matter expert. Let's say when we did for one of the project in Arab states, we engaged one of the member of the institutions who was a subject matter expert engineer, helping us to in the evaluation process. But mainly is a UNDP site who takes the lead from entire process from A to Z, because we're accountable for procurement process at the end. Another example was that we have been supplying thousands of computers to Ministry of Education, and we used the long-term agreement. It was a straightforward process which we placed order on behalf of the government. So UNDP can engage the not per se the how to say the authority or the government who is the like a high-level manager, but we engage mainly the subject matter experts if need. But at the end, UNDP, the voting power with UNDP. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. Let's move on to the last question. It's related to procurement of consulting or service products. Is that going to be done locally, or can the procurement be made in Korea with the service providers in Korea? And additionally, I'd like to know, during the bidding process, is the UNDP going to provide the standards on the bidding price?
Okay, no, thank you. So if I understand the question, let me answer, and we can do the follow-up. UNDP, the procedure and policy does not limit to any nations. So all the companies from any country, they can participate. Locally, so there could be some purchasing locally where specific language required, or the supply base is very limited in a local context. Let's say if the value is a small one, and you can find specific products in the country, like happened in one of the, we have been doing IT for one of the UN agencies, and it was in Asian country. The tender was locally conducted, even though it was a quite sizable amount, but because of the context of the country and the players in locally, also the requirements. So that was the kind of the local tendering process. In general, UNDP goes advertising internationally. Even there will be the mainly local suppliers. Example could be construction works. Even it's 1 million or 2 million, it's unlikely that the other country will be coming with all the equipment to another country. So that's based on the policy, we have to advertise internationally, but we'll be looking for mainly the local suppliers to participate in this tender. So that means that in this sense, based on the project and product and the services needs, it could be local, it could be regional, or it could be global. It's really depend on the context of the how many players in the market are there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And on this note, we'd like to close the Q&A session. We'd like to thank Park Teo for his time and valuable information. Next, we would like to invite Vicky Kim, Head of Business Division from GPAS Association, to talk about how to participate in UN procurement opportunities and Korean government support. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to make my presentation on how to participate in UN procurement opportunities and the Korean government support for businesses seeking those opportunities. I represent Korea GPAS Company Export Association, and for many of the companies who are participating in today's webinar, I was not able to get a clear understanding of each and every company's requirements. So I have tried to make my presentation rather baseline so that everyone can benefit from the basic information that I provide today. I ask for your kind understanding. First of all, this is the agenda. Introduction to international procurement market will be the first part, just to give you an overview of the international procurement market. And then, secondly, I'd like to give you an overview of the international tender process and the identification of vendors locally or partners for indirect entry. And lastly, I'd like to finish off with the government support that is available to you in capturing those opportunities. First of all, in terms of international procurement, it is basically referring to the acquisition of equipment, goods, and services or works needed by a specific country. So we are looking at it from the government procurement market as well as the international organizational market. On a global or a more comprehensive framework, this is looking at the international organization, which actually excludes the ODA market for the purpose of this presentation. For the government procurement market of foreign governments, this is looking at the governments that have joined the WTO GPA. So many of the governments probably have some policies in place for providing preferential treatment for national organizations and companies or SMEs. But outside of those basic preferences, it is open for international bidding. So according to the agreement, although the markets are actually opened in legislation, there may be some preferences given to national companies. For the international organizations market, the multilateral development banks and the UN will be the most representative entities in this market. Based on the contribution of the member nations, the market will be set for this area. It is based on fair competition for all companies on a global level. Now I'd like to move more closely to the UN procurement market. 193 member nations contributions constitute this overall market size. Since the UN has an absence of its own production base, all consumables, equipment, and everything is actually being procured through the international bidding process. The procurement size is at around $22 billion. And as was mentioned by Bakhtiar previously, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are actually reflected in the overall procurement process as well. Additionally, if you look on the bottom part of this slide, we have put in 10 of these organizations based upon the size of the procurement market. UNICEF, World Food Program, and UNDP, which is a co-host of today's webinar, take up the top 3 rankings. In 2019, I believe that the WHO was down to 9th in ranking, but due to the COVID pandemic, it has risen quite high in terms of the size of the procurement conducted. Let's look at the characteristics of these international procurement markets. The first thing that we often highlight is transparency in participation. The public tender openings and notifications are open to be viewed by anyone. So the transparency is a major trait that is different from other procurement processes. Also, the payment is quite stable because it is the counterparty is a government or a public entity or an international organization. And after a successful bid is won, then there are more business opportunities maintained on a longer term. And these opportunities actually provide a very good benefit in terms of creating a credible track record, enhancing the company's brand value. However, underneath, there is this invisible barrier. Many Korean companies are not able to actively take part in the international procurement market because of these invisible barriers. Let's take a look at what these challenges may be. First and foremost is a lack of understanding about these markets. If you don't understand the procedures and the processes related to international procurement, it's not easy for you to take part in there. There is actually a lot of information on the UNDP site, but many Korean companies don't know how they can actually navigate through all of that information to find that is relevant for them. The second challenge is lack of networking. The networks are very important for any entity to take part in a procurement process, to keep up the maintenance work after a successful bid, or to supply on a local level and follow up on that supply through local partners. Those things may be very difficult if you don't have the networks in place. The third characteristic is regarding certification. If I imagine myself as being someone in charge of procurement at UNDP, I may not know everything about this product or the services that are being proposed. So any valid certifications that can be recognized on an international level is very important in allowing the buyer to understand what merits your product or services has. And the last barrier is language barrier. Because this is not going to be conducted in Korean, you have to be able to provide all of your information and make proposals in English. And I believe that many Korean companies are having a hard time because of these language barriers. There are two ways of participating in international bidding. First one is direct. That is to say, you will take part by registering as a vendor and creating a proposal and do a tender offering. And the indirect method, which is on the bottom part of this slide, depending on the human resources or the lack of human resources, let's say that you want to use your network, use a local partner in that market to enter into that tender. So that can also be possible. It seems like that it's very complicated, this process, but the main objective here is that after the successful bid is done, you continue in the same manner. If I give you just some information on the front part of this process, the first step is vendor registration here. You have to identify the target market. Depending on which UN agency you're looking at, the procurement items may be different. And if it's MDBs or ODA types of markets, they may have different goods and services that they are looking into. So you have to do a study of that target market in order to be able to respond more actively and fittingly to the proposals that are going to be sought after. And after establishing the target market, you have to register as a vendor. In the case of the UN, you go into the UNGM, which is the main portal that you should register yourselves as. And then you search for the offerings that come online. If you go into the UNGM site, you can enter the product or the goods that you are able to offer, or you can actually search on the code area in order to identify which opportunities are open for you. So there are also services and support that we can provide from that perspective. For electronics or agricultural products, we have people in our association who look into the tender offerings and what kind of notifications are rising so that we can deliver that information to our member companies. I believe that UN also has tender alert service. If it is actually something that you have to pay for, but you can actually sign up for those paid services and you can get those informations very quickly. After that, you go through an analysis of what you have found out, what kind of requirements are being put forward, what are the terms and conditions and timelines and so forth. In the case of the UN, there are many cases where it's BAP, which means that the seller's burden is quite high. The actual delivery point and location may also be identified as well. If those areas tend to be conflict areas and so forth, in that case, you have to take into consideration whether transportation is feasible or not, all the way up to the delivery point that has been identified. So once all of that information has been analyzed, you may decide on whether you want to make a proposal or not. And then you go on to the proposal creation and then the bidding itself. After that, the actual delivery of the procurement items will be conducted and then the payment will be made. And then there is also the after service that follows.
And this is just a repeat of what I mentioned previously. So for direct contracts, so you register as a vendor in UNGM, and then there will be a requirement of expression of interest. And so for REOI, some of you may have never heard this, and I think you may want to know the difference between REOI versus, for example, RFP. And so I will spend some time in the next slide to describe what these acronyms actually mean. So we have REOI, and then we have the main notice, RFP, RFQ, and ITB. And then there will be a Q&A as well as some due diligence. And then you will prepare and submit your bid document, and then you will be able to participate in the tender. And if there are any errors or mistakes that you need to correct, then you can ask to correct this. And there's also an opportunity to network with the relevant managers. And so although the preliminary visit is not mandatory, we do recommend that you go and have a networking session with the managers. And so after you submit your bid, and you also have to go through the evaluation of the technical proposal as well as the price proposal. And then there will be a award notice. And then if you have a complaint, then you can actually raise your complaint. And for the award notice, once you are able to participate in the bid, you could also ask for a debriefing, and a lot of information can be shared. So whether or not you are eligible for a certain market should be evaluated, and whether or not you could continue to be a player in this market is something that you need to know. And so debriefing process is also a critical process that you should follow as well. And as I mentioned previously, I'll talk about each of the UN notices. So for the first one is request for EOI, and then we also have RFQ, ITB, and RFP. So for the REOI, we don't need to have a quotation, and so here we don't need to submit a quotation, but there is an REOI step because the objective is to make sure that the managers, for example, they want to do a market survey or they want to check whether these vendors can supply to this market. And so there will be an opportunity for you to introduce your company and market your products, goods, and services. So you don't have to submit a quotation, but once such information is provided to the UNDP, once there is a main notice, there will be an invitation sent out to the companies who have participated in the REOI. And so REOI does not mean that you will be awarded the project, but it's something that you can actually use to market your company and actively participate so that you get the invitation for the main tender. And so for RFQ and ITB, it's a very similar method. So for RFQ, this is less than 50,000 and ITB is above $50,000. And so once again, it's for the standardized goods and services. And for those who have met the minimum requirements, and it's the lowest price being quote being awarded the contract. And so we have RFQ stage as well. And for RFP, this is really for more non-standardized goods and services and other types of service procurement as well. There will be an overall evaluation of the price as well as the technical requirement evaluation to choose the final winner for the bid as well. And so depending on which type of notices that you will be bidding for, you also need to have an appropriate strategic approach as well. And this is up to now, I've talked about how we can actually directly participate in the UN tenders. And then now I'll talk about how to identify vendors through various notices. There are many ways for you to participate. The first thing that I would like to introduce is for you to be a vendor. And for us, this is also a method that we employ very often. And if you look at the UN annual statistics report, and they give you a detailed information under the procurement by supplier. And so you can check the company name and who are the main players in a specific category. Such information is readily available. So you could actually reach out to these companies and you want to collaborate because you have certain products that would match the profile of these companies. And then I'm going to talk more about the government support projects. And we have three different types of support given to the companies. The first one is the vendor registration. So whether it's UNGM or SAM or GBIZ, the National Procurement Office is responsible to provide the support for the vendor registration. And we also help you to prepare your proposal. And so there is a basic guideline or training given for you to be able to do the vendor registration. And we also have COICA, which is responsible for providing overseas ODA services. And we also have a center to support Korean companies who would like to participate in these projects. And for more indirect support projects, we have some consulting. We also have some market study team as well. And some of you may be familiar with this. 5 minutes left. And so in September, we will be holding COPEX, and at COPEX you'll be able to get a lot of information and have consulting provided as well. And we also have not only COPEX, but for example, in October or November, we have GPPM, and we have Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and for STSMP, it will be held in September in Busan. And so you can actually take part in all of these support projects. And unfortunately, this will not be live, it's virtual. So you are able to use this features to be able to meet with a lot of buyers who are actually overseas. And I have some examples to share. And for example, UNDP, which is the co-host of today's webinar, one of the things that we can actually share is that UNDP has procured furniture for Somalia, as well as UNDP procuring diesel generators for Myanmar. And you can actually look at the total project size, which is not very high, but at the same time, they have different types of tender, but you can also see that they'll be asking for some track record or some references. So this could be a starting point. So it may be a small project, but you win the bid, but this is a good reference for you to use for other future UNDP tenders as well. So for Somalia, in this case, this company, after winning this bid, because the Somalia has this civil war and internal conflict, the delivery was going to be difficult to the final destination. But fortunately, we're able to leverage the network that we have, and we were able to allow the delivery to be made partially, and there will be some other participants that will be able to finally deliver the goods to conflict areas. And in the case of Myanmar, local network is very critical for this market, and we do have a partner there, and we were able to work with the local company, and the local company can do the maintenance and after sales support for the diesel generators. And so such cooperation enabled the Korean company to supply the diesel generators because they had a good collaborative partnership with the local partner in Myanmar. And this is already something that we already talked about. We give you a explanation of what a GPAS company is. And so this ends my presentation. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer your questions.
네, 본부장님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kim, for that presentation. I know that there are some questions that have been given ahead of time and some questions that have come up on the chat box as well. So we'll go into the Q&A session. The first question is regarding small and medium-sized businesses. How can SMEs better prepare for and participate in UN procurements? And also, is there any special dedicated government support for these small and medium-sized businesses? I don't think in terms of opportunity and methodology, any difference between the large corporations and SMEs. I did give you some information at the end of the presentation, but for example, in the case of power generation, if you want to enter, the vendor registration process is very important, as well as creating the proposals. If you have a hard time because you're a small firm, in that case, we can actually give you a lot of support from that perspective at GPAS. So please make use of those opportunities. And by going through that experience, you can enhance your track record and experience in that field. And this will open up more opportunities for future contracts, I think. So I believe that the learning process of actual participation is very important.
네, 감사합니다. 두 번째 질문.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next question. Is there any translation support from the government when companies participate in UNDP or UN procurement opportunities? Translation support, it really depends on which language that is of interest. In many cases for the UN framework, it's mostly English. There may be cases where French or Spanish is required, but English proposals tend to take up the majority. Related to English translation, we don't have a support that just does the translation only. However, in some of our projects, monitoring the tenders that are opened, and also linking the relevant information to you, we have consultants that actually provide that support. So it's not a specific language translation support only, but related to the English that is required. If you have some limitations of capabilities, then we can support you through the support in the tender process.
네, 감사합니다. 다음 질문으로 넘어가도록 하겠습니다.
The next question is, how can Korean companies over other companies become more competitive and succeed in UNDP yuan procurements? The question that you just asked is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about as well. And because the lowest bid wins the award, we believe that price is an important feature. So for example, made in China and made in India, they have price advantage over Korean companies. And in the case of China, they used to be ranked about 20th, but now they may be the third largest supplier. And I think that really had a lot to do with the price advantage that China has. And so there may be some smaller projects, smaller notices. And I think those notices should be picked up by Korean companies as much as possible. It may be a small project and you may not want to actually participate because it's a small project. But as I mentioned in my presentation, small project is a starting point. It's a good reference point, whether it's small or maybe it's not a well-known market. It could be a blue ocean. We encourage you to take part, because in some cases, you may not have price advantage, but you definitely may have technical advantage. So I think that if you have strong technology, you should actually focus on RFP because that's the area that look at the technical evaluation as well. So for Korea, there is a recognition of how good our technology is. And that's why maybe it's not a standard common product. And because some of these products may not be something that UN would procure. But please go to UNGM site because there is a innovation product section and you could readily upload your good products there so that you can work with relevant agencies that are looking for such innovative products. And so, of course, for the technical evaluation, I believe that because of COVID, there has been a suspension, but there's this international procurement seminar, and this is an opportunity, a venue for you to really market your innovative products. And so, as I mentioned, Blue Ocean or smaller projects could be something that you should actively be looking at. And if you have strong technical background, you should actually look at RFP. And once again, for innovative products, we can also provide some government support and consultancy so that you can actually market your innovative products better to the world. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the last question. In UNGM, when you register as level 2, you have to have 3 reference letters to be uploaded. However, this is not a common business practice in Korean business culture. So I'd like to ask if, for example, some kind of qualification letter from CONEP, can that be a substitute for that? Well, actually, that is considered as a reference. And I believe that this is not an actual reference letter that the UN GM system actually requires. So I understand that you have to have those 3 reference letters, and you cannot simply substitute it with something coming from CONEP as a certificate, performance certificate. Thank you very much. With that, we would like to conclude the Q&A session for the second presentation. Thank you very much, Ms. Vicky Kim, for that presentation and the answers that you provided. And we ask for your kind understanding that we were not able to cover all questions due to time constraints. I would also like to ask Mr. Baktio Kamrev if he has anything to add after listening to the Q&A session.
Thank you so much. Maybe just a few points. What a representative from the KITA presented, the good points. So regarding the SME small companies, how they can participate, I think the power is where they can engage as a joint venture, either with the local companies or a few Korean companies, which we have seen a number of companies are doing. Some company come financially strong, and some company come with a product, so they participate in a specific tender together. So they have a more chances to win the contract. Another thing, what I also re-emphasize, as was mentioned by Kita speaker, that collaborating with the local companies or finding kind of the local partners would be very critical. In example, what I was giving on the 3 cycles, that we have been looking what kind of the support could be provided locally or virtually, like a training or the after-sales services, the spare parts could be provided by the local partners. If I take the, another was a question about the feasibility study. So we have a good example of engineering services, which feasibility study is part of that. The feasibility study is conducted in a way that every project is specific and either to advertise locally or it could be the bigger scope, like in our case we did for regional coverage. So in this tender, what was mentioned that we expect the companies to have local partners, because let's say if you do some surveys conducted, even you have the data points, you may need the local contractor to go and verify a specific space or place of the project to verify and give the data information. So I think that how they can participate, the Korean companies, is look for strengthen their opportunities through the associating with this other companies. There is no need formal joint venture, but it's specific kind of the putting together all the resources for a specific project. They make on one page joint venture for a specific project when they participate. But in general, I would encourage that. I think I understand the language is one of the challenging issue. So unfortunately, yes, we whatever tender document issued, either French, Spanish, or English, this would be overriding kind of information, the requirements. But despite of that, what I would encourage to look for opportunity, there are a lot of opportunities indeed, and in English and other languages, the countries where the Korean suppliers can play a big part. Look for opportunities for partnering with the local companies, looking for with the large companies to partner. So I think that would be one of the options they can consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. for the additional comments. And we would like to also thank Vicky for her presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of today's event. Thank you to UNDP Seoul Power Center and GPS Association. We hope that this was a valuable time for all our participants, and we wish you great success in successfully participating in the UN procurement market. Thank you to our speakers, and we are currently living in COVID pandemic. I hope that you keep your health, and once again, thank you for your participation.